Okay, great. So, welcome to our Buyin webinar. So the topic today is standardization of lending services, a peek inside. And I can see some of the participants. It's like an international group of people joining us for this call. And we know that additional participants were planning to join us during the session. Basically, for those of you who have not been able to join any of the sessions, we started this monthly series of webinars with an overview of the Buyin service landscape through Buyin member ING. Then we had a deep dive on the topic of the business partner, as it was called previously, or now it's called party, through Credit Suisse and SAP. And today we're going to speak about lending, which is somehow related to party. My name is Karen Fischenbeck. I'm a Secretary General of Buyin, and my background is basically a mortgage loan specialist, so I know from my professional experience that banks try to differentiate more in the pricing, in the market, towards the customers. But there are quite a few similarities and also some potential with regard to standardization, identifying commonalities, and for instance, for credit factories to do business or to manage processing, for instance, for a variety of different banks. So basically what Buyin does is trying to come up with an open standard in that space to ensure that reusability is there. Standardization enables reusability of services. And how this is being done and what has been achieved so far will be presented to us by Anjali. Anjali Joglekar is product group, is part of the product group at FERNBACH, at Buyin member FERNBACH. She's product manager and specializing in risk compliance, specifically in the topic of lending. And Anjali will show us how standardization paves the way for easier reuse of functions. And as we all know, banks really have heterogeneous environments, and quite a few banks are really on this journey towards the transformation of their bank. And what they are really challenged with is integration. So trying to integrate in-house development with software from the market, so commercially available software. And what they find is really that the boundaries, that the common terms are not there. So what we are trying to do with Buyin is really to create this standard, to make it easier for banks to integrate different packages. Right, so before we start, just a couple of housekeeping notes because we would like to record the session, and some of you may have seen the recordings available on the Buyin web page, and we'll see the link later on if you would like to share this with your colleagues or have a review of the previous webinars that you may have missed. So therefore all the participants will be muted, and there will be a Q&A session at the end of our session. And if you have any questions in the intermediate, please feel free to use the chat function. So we're going to have a look at the chat function if there are any urgent questions related to what we're sharing with you today. So the agenda, and we will have a quick look at this later with Anjali. It covers FERNBACH and Buyin. I will start with a Buyin overview, and Anjali will be leading us through the Buyin deliverables in lending. So for those of you who are not that familiar with Buyin, which is short for Banking Industry Architecture Network, it was founded in 2008, but it also has a history of that, so it goes back to 2006 basically. And in 2008, it was transitioned into a not-for-profit organization, an independent organization. And the main goal is really to come up with an open standard. So that's the vision. And the more and more banks and partners adopt this standard, the better, of course, because then it will enable the banks really to select packages on the market that are really built according to these common definitions. Currently, we're focusing on application to application, and we're currently having this focus on the banking industry, as you can see on the right-hand side, with the partners in different continents: Credit Suisse, UniCredit, ING, Deutsche Bank, Postbank, and Europe, Scotiabank from Canada, Standard Bank from South Africa, and Commonwealth Bank of Australia. So it's a broad and global spread. And the banks, what the banks do is really actively engage in the different working groups, and they share their requirements for these core services. And the leading software and services vendors that we have on board, like SunGard, Microsoft, SAP, CGI, FERNBACH, that we're going to have today, Temenos, for instance, and others, really adopt these definitions and these boundaries, and you will find that if you're a customer of these software vendors, you will find the definitions accordingly reflected in the products. So basically, we have 24 members currently, but there will be announcements shortly. We're going to have more members in the near future. And this also shows that there's an increasing interest in standardization to make sure that not the banks individually develop the solutions, but this will be a joint effort, developing it once, agreeing on the standard, and then adopting it. So basically, before we go into the lending space, as you can see here, quite a few of our members, like Postbank, like UniCredit, or like Scotiabank and Commonwealth Bank, are having major and complex transformation programs on their way. So this is also why the lending space, which is also covered, plays a major role in that, and also this is reflected in the Buyin working group structure. So we've got a working group that is headed by FERNBACH, and I would like to ask Anjali now to give us a closer insight into the work that has been done, but also in a look beyond into the future, what the working group is planning to do in the near future, to give you some flavor of how they work together. Anjali, are you ready to take over for the lending space?
Yes. Thank you, Karen. Thank you for the introduction. And I'm sure on that note, everyone is very keen to look into the details of our deliverables. But before we get into that, I'd like to quickly run through the agenda a bit more. You have already started with the Buyin introduction. I will continue with a short introduction of FERNBACH Software, and our association with Buyin. Why did we join Buyin, and what was our reasoning behind doing that? And then we can jump into the details of the lending working group deliverables, or what is the work that has been completed so far, what is published, what is ready to be published and released, and this will cover service definition, work around service definitions, business scenarios, business objects, and other details in the lending working group. Besides that, we will also speak about how we contribute to the evaluation of evolution of the service landscape, the Buyin service landscape, and how we also get the service domains identified in the service landscape to work upon. So that's also something we are going to speak about. We will also speak about the various interactions between the various service definition groups. So the multiple service definition groups and their interoperability will also be discussed. And we will then go on to speak about what we have planned for the remaining year and the next months to come. This will also be specifically of interest to some of the participants if they would like to join and contribute in completing the next steps. Finally, we will also talk about the Buyin benefits and then open the session for Q&A. So this is what we've planned for the remainder of the session today. I will now begin with a short introduction of FERNBACH Software. FERNBACH Software is a company founded in 1986 in Luxembourg, and which is also our headquarters. It has consequently now expanded to various locations in Europe, in UK, in Hong Kong, and we have planned further locations in Asia as well. We are about a 200 odd company, and we are fully focused on the banking industry. Our product line mainly revolves around finance and risk, and we have products for multi-gap, risk and compliance, and also lending. Specifically speaking about lending, our lending suite is SOA compliant and is component based. So the components are essentially packaged as lending services, which in turn again reiterate the concept of reusability in complex environments and making integration simpler. So that is our aim through our lending suite as well. Now, these principles perfectly align with the Buyin principles as well, and this has been one of our main reasons why we also decided to join Buyin in late 2008. So that was our starting point of why we decided to join Buyin. And increasingly what you come across as well is the banking requirements which move around automating your manual processes, making systems much more flexible, having tailored solutions, and also trying to reduce the complexity of IT integration and the costs around it. And vendors in turn, like us, we want to help and cater these banks' requirements and implement these requirements as well. So one of our key drivers was to be involved, be associated with Buyin, be involved in the creation of such standards, which can also be incorporated in our own product hierarchy and then in turn be offered to customers. So that was our reasoning behind it. Now clearly the benefit for customers who would then use SOA compliant, Buyin compliant services would be that these services are actually put together by the best of breed experts on one platform. You have banks putting forth their requirements, you have vendors also discussing and absorbing these requirements, and you have the best of these standards put together to be consumed by customers. So this is one of the biggest benefits we did see for the customers. So this is a little bit about FERNBACH and why we joined Buyin and what is our aim towards this purpose. Okay, so now moving further down in the agenda, now we'll speak in detail about the working group lending and the work that we have done so far and what is the work that we are going to take up in the next month. Okay. In order to talk about these details, let's take a quick look at the Buyin service landscape, which is actually a logical functional decomposition of the services in a bank. And it's divided into business areas, business domains, and further level of detail into service domains and the definitions around these service domains. Now, specifically in this service landscape, we are sticking to the entire loan services or the set of loan services. And in order to complete these loan services, an initial set of service domains were identified in this landscape, and the definitions around it was taken up for completion. So this was the first set of deliverables that we were looking forward to complete as a part of the working group lending. If you look at the screen, there are a few service domains already highlighted. Like I mentioned, you have offer management, agreement management, customer loan, operational contract, and incoming payment allocation. These were the initial service domains that we worked upon. Talking about the first one, that is offer management, it involves definition of services around the entire life cycle of the offer. Now, every service domain is defined by certain responsibilities, capabilities, and delegations. Offer management will involve services like editing an offer, checking a customer, decisioning of the offer, etc., etc. And it essentially draws responsibilities from a typical front office, a loan front office, and delegates into the next service definitions or service domains. The next service domain, like the offer management, is the agreement management, and we completed the work around agreement management. It has been defined like the offer management, and it draws its responsibilities from the middle office and delegates it to our next service domain. Again, it involves services around the entire agreement management, and the scope of which has been restricted to lending only. So when we speak about offer, agreement, and in the coming slides we speak about the customer loan operational contract, we're speaking only about retail customers, and the scope has been limited to lending only. The next set of deliverables that we undertook was, like the offer and agreement management, around the customer loan operational contract, which involved the life cycle of the customer loan operational contract, or the contract between the bank and the customer. This is ready and it is yet to be published, however. And the final set of deliverables that we completed as a part of our service definitions was incoming payment allocation. Again, this is more of a generic service domain. However, we have taken it under the scope of lending right now, and the idea is to allocate the incoming payments from lending based on rules. So these are the four service domains that we have already defined at level 1, adhering to the service landscape of Buyin. Now again, the first two are already published. The second two, that is the customer contract and the payment allocation, is ready to be published, and they should be published in the next few days. The date for it is yet to be decided. But the results of these are again available on the Buyin webpage, and they should be available for access. The information for accessing this information, we are going to share this at the end of the presentation. Right. So going further into the other areas that we worked upon as a part of the working group, one was firstly identify the initial scope of service domains in the loan area. Then once we had created these service definitions, it was also needed that we check that these service definitions work together, or how they work together, and validate the engagement between these various service domains. So the purpose of creating these business scenarios was both of these, as I mentioned, and thirdly, it also helps us identify further service domains. So initially what we've looked at right now are just a few service domains based on the initial service landscape from Buyin. Now as the Buyin landscape evolves and gets more and more detailed, there will be additional service domains which will come under the lending scope or the lending working group. And creation of these business scenarios or use cases will also help in identifying these service domains. So the second set of deliverables was around creation of business scenarios, and one such sample is what you see on the screen. It's around the consumer loan origination, and it depicts how the various service domains in the loan context engage with each other. So you can see that you have the service domain offer and the service domain agreement as created by the working group, and how it interacts in the total life cycle of consumer loan origination. Moving on, the third set of deliverables was around creating a business object model, which was based on the meta model of Buyin. And this was again essentially to show the relationship or the interaction at the object level. So we have seen business scenarios which show how the various service domains interact or sit together. The next level of detail was to see that in each of these service domains, you have object level interaction, object level dependencies, and the idea of creating these business object models was exactly to show these dependencies. Again, a sample of which is what you see on the screen. You can see in the lending focus or in the lending context, you have offer management and agreement management, as we have seen earlier. Within offer management, you have loan offer, which is a business object, and its dependencies with the other objects in the scenario. Okay, so in the deliverables so far, we spoke about the service definitions, the four service domain definitions, which have been published and completed. We spoke about the business scenarios in order to test or see the interaction between these service domains, and we also have seen the business object model based on the meta model. So these are the three things which we have completed so far, and we will see in the next steps in the further slides what we intend to take up beyond this. Moving on to the next point, we spoke about the buying service landscape in the initial slide, which was a version, an earlier version, and now we have moved on to an evolved and more refined version, which is towards 1.5, and we have contributed to identifying more service domains, or we want to contribute to identifying more service domains. So essentially, what you have seen till now is a limited set of service domains which were taken up as an initial set of deliverables to act upon. Now, again, if you recall, I had mentioned in my slides that the scope was limited to consumers, and we intend to take on some additional service domains which may be beyond consumer, and it will extend to corporate lending, etc., etc. However, the following service domains, some of them to name, are mentioned on the screen over here. We have collateral management, underwriting, product matching or campaigning, and other aspects of a loan cycle, delinquency management, which will also come under the scope of the working group. And we will also do a similar service domain definition followed by business scenarios and business object model creation for the same. Again, this is a refined version of the service landscape and with highlights of areas around lending. The actual version of the service landscape now, 1.5, is ready to be published and is ready for release as well. More information around that will be shared by Karen towards the end of the webinar, and there is more additional information that you will also find on the website. But this is the newer version of the service landscape, and now, like I mentioned earlier, the idea is to again create business scenarios and identify more and more service domains that will engage in completing an entire loan process. Right. So again, that was about how the service landscape is contributing for our service definition groups and vice versa. And now the next topic to talk about is how the various service definition groups can draw information from each other, and how are they using this mode of interaction. So this is something which you can see on the upcoming slide, where you have an example of how the various service definition groups are exchanging information. For example, in offer management, while creating an offer, you also need to talk to the service domain business partner and create a business partner. For payments or allocating incoming payments, you need to talk to service definition payments. And for profitability check, you need to talk to, again, the service domain analytics. So these are the various service domains that the lending service domains would talk to in the process of completing these loan services. This is one example, a sample example for that. Right. This is the work done so far and what has been finished and completed, and is available to be read or accessed from the Buyin webpage. What we do intend to undertake, like I have mentioned briefly in the previous slides, is with the new version of the service landscape finalized and ready to be published, the idea is again to identify more and more service domains that will help in the completion of the loan process and create business scenarios around them. Like I mentioned, again, increase the scope to corporate loans or corporate loan products, changing agreements, early repayments, dunning and delinquency management. So these are some of the service domains and business scenarios around it that we intend to take up from the new service landscape. The next step would then be to complete work or complete definition around these and to get them approved and publish them again like the earlier ones for further use. This is what we plan for the next few months, and hopefully this will also get more interest from participants as to the work that we are doing, and everyone is welcome to actively contribute to it by becoming a Buyin member. Uh, on this note, I'd actually just like to quickly summarize what we've spoken about, and then I'll hand over to Karen, who will again reiterate the Buyin benefits, and then we can go on to Q&A. So again, for a quick recap, what we have spoken about is the deliverables so far produced by the working group lending, the next steps and the work around the service landscape, the Buyin service landscape, our work with other service definition work groups, the planned agenda for the remaining 2011 and the next months to come. And with this, I'll hand over to Karen, and I'll be happy to take on questions at the end of the session. Karen?
Thank you very much, Anjali, for sharing with us more detailed insight into the lending space and what has been done and will be done within Buyin. So what I'm going to do while you have more time now to think about your questions that you may have for Anjali around lending specifically or around Buyin, just briefly highlighting what we learned from the Buyin members, what are the benefits of being actively engaged. Of course, as Anjali mentioned, the results will be published according to the Buyin internal processes, so there will be a quality check within, and as soon as we feel that this is ready for publication, these deliverables will be published. But of course, the Buyin members are first of all able to shape these results as they will be published later, but they will also have access to work in progress. And this will allow them instant access to be able to align their own product creation or their projects with this, like the evolution of the service landscape. So just a couple of points for you that we hear from the Buyin members. What they feel is that integration will be easier because if we agree on these standards and also the adoption is there, so the Buyin members like the banks and the partners adopt and implement the deliverables, this will lead through easier integration, so other customers, other banks are able to buy packages that are compliant with the Buyin agreements and with the Buyin definitions. So this is the benefit. Also for them to be able to share experiences with other experts from member banks during these sessions, either during the workgroup sessions or during physical meetings, which is also some learning effect. So like, for instance, ING uses Buyin as a platform really to check whether their own approach is the right one, like a sanity check for their own approaches and plans. And other banks really use it to share and learn from others that are more mature and more advanced with regards to their transformation programs. Of course, it's also possible to learn more about emerging trends and more emerging business architecture topics rather than all the banks and all the partners doing that individually. And it's basically the opportunity to be actively involved, to bring in your requirements as a bank and also as a vendor to share this and check your approaches with the others, and then really have this as a benchmark, as a reference. And as Anjali mentioned, there will be publications in the near future, so within the next 1 or 2 weeks. And we will come up with this new version 1.5, which not only includes the a more advanced service landscape, version 1.5, but also a how-to guide, so how to use the service landscape. So this is a very comprehensive document that will be available along with the meta model that is aligned with the new service landscape. So there will be a complete package published and made available on the Buyin website. So check out for announcements. And if you would like to provide feedback on the deliverables, there will be the opportunity for you to do so, and you're welcome to send us your notes, remarks, feedback, and we'll also set up a questionnaire to make it easier for you to submit the feedback. Basically, that leads me to the question, where do you find more information about Buyin? So today we were talking more about lending, but there's also more comprehensive information on the Buyin webpage that you may have seen already on buyin.org. We're also, of course, happy to arrange individual follow-up sessions for your team. And of course, we will be present at upcoming banking events like Cybos in Toronto, where we're going to have a booth with Microsoft, one of our Buyin members. But of course, you will find experts from the different working groups also at other booths for members like ACI Worldwide, like CGI, like SunGuard, SAP, Temenos, and so on. And of course, there will be member-hosted events where you will hear more about Buyin and where you will have the opportunity to meet with the experts. And of course, there is the upcoming webinars. There will be another session which really leads us into more detail of the Buyin service landscape on July 20th. The service landscape 1.5, as I mentioned, the how-to guide and the meta model. There will also be 2 sessions as we had today. And of course, it's the same link for the registration, so feel free to register for this webinar to learn more about the next deliverables. So, and now time for you to ask your questions. Well, Anjali is still online. Whether there's any